In a small, quiet town surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods, there lived a mechanic named Jack. His garage was nothing fancy, just an old tin-roofed shed with peeling paint and tools scattered across the floor. It wasn't much to look at, but to the people in the town it was a lifeline. Jack had a reputation for fixing cars that others had given up on. No matter how complicated the problem or how beat up the vehicle, Jack could usually find a way to make it run again. He worked long hours, often skipping meals and staying late into the night, but he barely made enough to keep the lights on. Still, he never complained. For Jack, repairing cars wasn't just a job, it was a way of helping people. One chilly morning, as Jack sipped his lukewarm coffee and stared out at the empty driveway, a loud rumble interrupted the silence. A beat-up pickup truck pulled in, its engine sputtering and coughing smoke. Out stepped a man in worn-out boots and a faded jacket. His face was lined with age and hardship, but his posture was strong, like someone who had seen tough times and kept going anyway. The man introduced himself as Tom and explained that his car had broken down on the highway. With no money left, after medical bills, he hoped Jack could help him at a reasonable cost. Jack nodded sympathetically and got to work. As he popped the hood, he saw the damage was extensive. The carburetor needed replacing, the radiator was leaking, and several belts were frayed beyond use. It would take time and effort, but Jack couldn't turn away someone in such dire straits. For hours he tinkered under the hood, his hands smeared with grease and oil. He didn't rush. Instead, he focused on doing the job right, even though it meant spending more time than usual. By late afternoon, the car purred back to life, running smoother than it probably had in years. When Tom returned to pick it up, his eyes welled with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough," he said, handing over what little cash he had. Jack refused to accept more than half of what the job was worth. They shook hands firmly, and Tom drove off, leaving Jack wondering if he'd ever see him again. The brigade next day started like any other, with Jack wrestling with a stubborn alternator from an old sedan. Just as he wiped sweat from his brow, a sleek black limousine glided silently into his driveway. The contrast between the luxurious vehicle and his humble garage was almost comical. A chauffeur stepped out and approached Jack, asking if he was the one who repaired Tom's car. Surprised, Jack confirmed it, unsure of what to expect. The chauffeur gestured toward the limo, inviting Jack to step inside. Hesitant but curious, Jack climbed in, finding Tom seated comfortably within. Smiling warmly, Tom revealed that he wasn't just a struggling veteran, he was also part of a wealthy family that owned several businesses. Impressed by Jack's kindness and skill, Tom wanted to repay him in a way that went beyond mere gratitude. Tom handed Jack an envelope containing a generous check, far more than Jack had earned in months. But it wasn't just about the money, it came with an offer. Tom explained that his family was looking for someone trustworthy to manage their fleet of vehicles. They needed someone who understood engines inside out and treated people fairly. Would Jack be interested? Overwhelmed, Jack hesitated. Managing a fleet sounded daunting, especially for someone used to working alone in a tiny garage. Yet, the opportunity was too good to pass up. After some thought, he agreed, realizing this could change not only his life but also allow him to support others in need. Within weeks, Jack found himself overseeing a state-of-the-art facility filled with cutting-edge tools and a team of skilled mechanics. At first, adjusting to the new environment was challenging. He missed the simplicity of his old garage and the satisfaction of doing everything himself. However, he quickly adapted, using his experience to mentor his team and ensure every vehicle they serviced met his high standards. Word spread about the quality of their work, and soon they were handling repairs for clients from all walks of life. Jack even set aside time each week to offer free services to veterans and low-income families, staying true to the values that guided him through tough times. Months turned into years, and Jack's hard work paid off in ways he never imagined. He expanded the business further, opening branches in neighboring towns. Along the way, he married a kind-hearted woman who shared his passion for helping others, and together, they raised 2 children. Though success brought comfort and stability, Jack never forgot where he came from or the lesson he learned that fateful day when Tom's limo arrived. Kindness, he realized, wasn't just a virtue. It was a bridge connecting lives in unexpected ways. And so every evening, as he locked up the garage and watched the sun dip below the horizon, Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing he'd turned broken parts into something whole, not just in cars but in people's lives too. The morning after Tom's truck was repaired, Jack woke up feeling a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. He had spent hours hunched over the engine, his hands stained with grease and oil, determined to get the job done right. Though he didn't charge much for the repair, knowing that Tom was struggling financially, Jack felt good about helping someone in need. It wasn't often that he got to see the immediate impact of his work on another person's life. But as he sipped his coffee and stared out the window of his tiny garage, he couldn't shake the thought that something unusual might happen because of it. Jack's day started like any other. A few customers trickled in with their cars, some needing minor fixes while others required more extensive repairs. He worked steadily, losing himself in the rhythm of turning wrenches and tightening bolts. By mid-afternoon, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the driveway. Just as Jack wiped his hands on a rag and prepared to tackle the next vehicle, a sleek black limousine turned into his driveway. Its polished surface gleamed under the fading sunlight, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of his worn-down garage. For a moment, Jack froze, unsure if he was seeing things correctly. Limousines didn't usually pull into his lot unless they were part of a joke or a prank, but this one seemed real enough. The driver stepped out, dressed in a crisp uniform, and walked toward Jack with purpose. "Are you Jack?" the chauffeur asked politely. Jack nodded, his curiosity piqued. "There's someone here who wants to speak with you," the man continued, gesturing toward the back seat of the limo. Still confused, Jack approached the car cautiously. When the door opened, he saw Tom sitting inside, wearing a warm smile. For a second, Jack wondered if he should pinch himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. What was a veteran driving an old pickup doing in a luxury limousine? And why was he back so soon? "Jack, I hope you don't mind me stopping by again," Tom said, his voice friendly but serious. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did yesterday." Before Jack could respond, Tom handed him an envelope. It was thick and sealed, and Jack immediately knew it contained something important. His first instinct was to refuse. It wasn't in his nature to accept gifts, but Tom stopped him before he could protest. "Please, just hear me out," Tom said firmly. "You helped me when I needed it most, and I want to repay you. This isn't charity. It's gratitude. Open it later if you're uncomfortable now, but know that it comes from the heart." Feeling awkward and unsure how to react, Jack accepted the envelope reluctantly. As he held it in his hand, he noticed the quality of the paper and the elegant handwriting. Something about it screamed wealth, and for the first time Jack realized there might be more to Tom than met the eye. Tom leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "There's something else I'd like to discuss with you, Jack. My family owns several businesses, including a large fleet of vehicles. We've been searching for someone trustworthy to manage the maintenance side of things. Someone who knows cars inside and out and treats people fairly. After seeing your work yesterday, I think you'd be perfect for the role." Jack blinked, stunned. Manage a fleet? Work for a wealthy family? The idea seemed absurd. He glanced around at his cluttered garage, where tools lay scattered and oil stains marked the floor. How could someone like him fit into such a world? Sensing his hesitation, Tom added quickly, "I'm not asking you to decide right now. Take some time to think about it. All I'm saying is, you have a rare talent, and you deserve a chance to use it in a way that benefits both you and others." The chauffeur stepped forward, then opening the door wider as if signaling the end of their conversation. Jack stepped back, still holding the envelope, his mind racing with questions. What would it mean to leave his garage behind? Could he handle the responsibilities of managing a fleet? And most importantly, did he even want to try? As the limousine pulled away, leaving behind only the faint smell of leather and polish, Jack stood rooted to the spot. He looked down at the envelope in his hand, suddenly aware of its weight, not just physically but emotionally. Whatever decision he made next would change everything. For now, though, all he could do was return to work, pretending that nothing extraordinary had happened. But deep down, Jack knew better. That envelope held more than just money. It held possibilities. And as he went back to fixing engines and replacing parts, his thoughts kept drifting to the limousine and the man who had offered him a lifeline. Was this fate giving him a second chance? Or was it simply testing whether he had the courage to take a leap into the unknown? Only time would tell. That night, after closing up the garage, Jack sat on the creaky wooden steps leading up to his apartment. The envelope Tom had given him rested on his lap, unopened. He stared at it for a long time, his mind swirling with thoughts and doubts. It was strange how one small act of kindness, fixing a veteran's car without overcharging him, had led to this unexpected moment. Jack wasn't used to surprises like this. His life had always been predictable. Wake up early, fix cars all day, go to bed late. But now, sitting in the dim light of a single bulb hanging above the driveway, he felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. Finally, curiosity got the better of him. He tore open the envelope and pulled out a check. When he saw the amount written on it, his breath caught in his throat. It was more money than he'd made in months, maybe even years. For a mechanic struggling to keep his garage running, it was life-changing. But instead of feeling excitement, Jack felt uneasy. Was accepting this too much? Did he deserve it? He tried to push those thoughts aside, reminding himself that Tom had insisted this was gratitude, not charity. Still, the weight of the check pressed heavily on his conscience. The next morning, Jack woke up earlier than usual. Sleep hadn't come easily, and when it did, his dreams were filled with images of limousines, garages, and fleets of cars stretching endlessly into the horizon. As he brewed his coffee, he decided to visit Sarah, an old friend who owned a diner down the street. She had known him since he first opened the garage and always seemed to have wise advice for tough situations. When Jack walked into the diner, the smell of bacon and fresh pancakes greeted him. Sarah looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Hey, stranger," she said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "You look like you've got something heavy on your mind." Jack sighed, sliding onto a stool. "I do," he admitted. Over the next hour, he told her everything, about Tom's truck, the limousine, the envelope, and the job offer. Sarah listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but mostly letting him talk. When he finished, she leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "So, what's stopping you?" she asked simply. Jack hesitated. "It's complicated. I'm just a guy who fixes cars in a tiny garage. Managing a fleet sounds impossible. What if I mess it up?" Sarah chuckled softly. "Jack, you're selling yourself short. You're the best mechanic I know. People trust you because you don't cheat them or cut corners. That's why Tom came back. He saw something in you. Sure, managing a fleet is different, but skills are skills. And if they're offering training and support, then what's the harm in trying?" Her words stayed with him throughout the day. As he worked on a customer's car, replacing brake pads and adjusting the suspension, he found himself replaying their conversation. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he was capable of more than he gave himself credit for. After all, he'd built his garage from scratch, teaching himself along the way. If he could do that, couldn't he learn to manage a team? Later that evening, Jack decided to take another step toward clarity. He called Tom, using the number he'd scribbled on the back of the envelope. The phone rang only once before Tom answered, his voice warm and welcoming. "Jack, how are you holding up?" "I've been thinking about your offer," Jack began, his tone cautious, "and I wanted to ask some questions." "Of course," Tom replied. "Ask away." For the next 20 minutes, Jack peppered Tom with questions. What exactly would the job entail? Would he have to relocate? How big was the fleet? Tom answered each question patiently, explaining that the position involved overseeing maintenance schedules, managing a team of mechanics, and ensuring the vehicles were always in top condition. The facility was located about an hour away, so relocation wouldn't be necessary unless Jack wanted it. Most importantly, Tom emphasized that Jack wouldn't be alone. He'd receive guidance and support every step of the way. By the end of the call, Jack felt slightly less overwhelmed. Tom's confidence in him was contagious, and for the first time, he allowed himself to entertain the idea of saying yes. Still, he needed time to process everything. Hanging up the phone, he grabbed a notebook and started jotting down pros and cons. On one side, he listed the benefits: financial stability, new opportunities, and the chance to grow professionally. On the other side, he wrote down his fears: failure, stepping out of his comfort zone and leaving behind the simplicity of his current life. As he stared at the page, he realized something surprising. The list of pros was longer and the items on it carried more weight. Over the next few days, Jack threw himself into work, hoping the routine would help clear his head. But no matter how hard he focused on tightening bolts or diagnosing engine problems, his thoughts kept drifting back to Tom's offer. One afternoon, while repairing a radiator leak, he accidentally burned his hand on a hot pipe. The sharp sting brought tears to his eyes, but as he rinsed the wound under cold water, he had a sudden realization. Pain often came before progress. Just like the burn forced him to slow down and care for himself, taking this leap might hurt at first, but it could also lead to something better. That night, unable to sleep, Jack made a decision. He picked up the phone again and dialed Tom's number. This time his voice was steady. "Tom, I've thought about your offer," he said, "and I've decided to give it a shot. I can't promise I'll get everything right, but I'll do my best." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a chuckle. "That's all anyone can ask for, Jack. Trust me, you're going to do great. Let's set up a meeting so we can go over the details." As they spoke, Jack felt a surge of determination wash over him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the confines of his tiny garage. Maybe this was the break he needed, not just financially, but personally. Perhaps it was a chance to prove to himself that he was capable of more than he'd ever believed. In the weeks that followed, Jack threw himself into preparing for the transition. He cleaned out his garage, sorting through tools and spare parts that had accumulated over the years. Some items he sold, others he donated to local mechanics who were just starting out. With each box he packed, he felt a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. This place had been his sanctuary, his battlefield, and his home. Leaving it behind wasn't easy, but he reminded himself that endings often paved the way for new beginnings. Tom kept his word, introducing Jack to the family's operations manager, who walked him through the ins and outs of managing a fleet. They toured the main facility, a sprawling complex equipped with advanced diagnostic machines, hydraulic lifts, and rows of gleaming vehicles waiting for service. Jack marveled at the efficiency and organization, realizing how different this world was from his solitary days in the garage. Yet amidst the unfamiliarity, he found comfort in knowing that the core principles remained the same. Diagnose the problem, find the solution, and treat people with respect. As part of his training, Jack shadowed experienced mechanics and supervisors, learning how to delegate tasks and manage schedules. He discovered that leadership required not just technical expertise, but also communication skills and empathy. He made mistakes along the way, misjudging repair times, misallocating resources, but instead of dwelling on them, he used each error as a lesson. Slowly but surely, he began to adapt, finding his rhythm within the bustling environment. By the time he officially took over as head of the fleet department, Jack felt ready, or as ready as he could be. Standing in front of his new team on his first official day, he addressed them with sincerity. "I'm not here because I know everything," he admitted. "I'm here because I care about doing things right. Together we'll keep these vehicles running smoothly and make sure our clients trust us. That's the goal." His words resonated with the crew, many of whom had grown weary of previous managers who prioritized profits over people. Under Jack's leadership, morale improved, productivity soared, and the department earned a reputation for excellence. Clients praised the quality of their services, and word spread quickly about the mechanic-turned-manager, who treated everyone with fairness and kindness. Though success brought comfort and recognition, Jack never forgot the values that guided him through his toughest days. He instituted a policy allowing free repairs for veterans and low-income families once a month, ensuring that those in need wouldn't be left stranded. It was his way of paying forward the kindness that had changed his life. Jack's first few weeks as the head of the fleet department were a whirlwind of activity. Every morning he arrived at the sprawling facility before sunrise, determined to learn everything he could about his new role. The place was nothing like his old garage. Instead of oil-stained floors and scattered tools, there were gleaming machines, organized workstations, and rows of vehicles lined up neatly in bays. At first glance, it felt intimidating, almost overwhelming. But Jack reminded himself that he hadn't gotten this far by giving up when things got tough. The operations manager, a seasoned professional named Linda, became his guide during those early days. She showed him how to track maintenance schedules, order parts efficiently, and communicate with drivers who needed their vehicles serviced quickly. "You'll get the hang of it," she assured him one afternoon as they reviewed a spreadsheet filled with deadlines and repair requests. "Just focus on one thing at a time." Despite her encouragement, Jack often felt out of his depth. Managing a team of mechanics was completely different from working alone. In his old garage, he'd been responsible only for himself. Now he had to delegate tasks, resolve conflicts, and ensure everyone stayed on schedule. Some days, he wondered if he'd made a mistake accepting Tom's offer. But then he'd remember why he'd taken the job, not just for himself, but for the chance to grow and help others. One of the biggest challenges came when a delivery truck broke down on a busy highway. The driver called in a panic, explaining that the vehicle was blocking traffic and causing delays. Jack immediately gathered a small team and headed to the scene. As they worked under the blazing sun, sweat dripping into their eyes, Jack realized how much he missed the hands-on aspect of being a mechanic. For a brief moment, he forgot about spreadsheets and meetings and focused solely on solving the problem. By the time the truck roared back to life, the driver shook Jack's hand gratefully, saying, "Thanks for saving my day." That experience taught Jack something valuable. Leadership didn't mean stepping away from the work entirely. It meant knowing when to step in and lend a hand. From then on, he made an effort to stay involved in repairs, even as he juggled managerial duties. His team appreciated seeing him roll up his sleeves alongside them, proving that he wasn't afraid to get dirty. As weeks turned into months, Jack began to settle into his new routine. He learned to balance administrative tasks with practical ones, finding joy in both. He also started implementing changes based on what he'd observed in his old garage. For example, he introduced a system where mechanics rotated shifts so no one was stuck working late every night. He also created a suggestion box, encouraging employees to share ideas for improving efficiency or morale. To his surprise, many of them responded enthusiastically, offering creative solutions that actually worked. Word of Jack's leadership style spread quickly through the company. Drivers praised the reliability of the fleet, while executives commended him for reducing downtime and cutting costs without sacrificing quality. Even Linda, who had initially seemed skeptical of Jack's ability to adapt, admitted one evening over coffee, "You're doing better than I expected. Keep this up and you'll go far." But success wasn't without its struggles. There were moments when Jack doubted himself, especially when mistakes happened. One particularly stressful week, 2 vehicles broke down within hours of each other, due to overlooked issues. The drivers were frustrated and upper management demanded answers. Instead of blaming his team, Jack took full responsibility. "It's my job to make sure these things don't happen," he told them during a meeting. "Let's figure out what went wrong and fix it together." Afterward, he worked closely with his crew to identify gaps in their processes. They implemented stricter inspection protocols and scheduled regular check-ins to catch potential problems early. Though the incident had shaken him, it ultimately strengthened his relationship with the team. They respected his honesty and willingness to take accountability. Outside of work, Jack tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. He still visited Sarah's diner whenever he could, sharing updates about his new life. She listened intently, occasionally offering advice or simply cheering him on. "You're proving yourself, Jack," she said one afternoon. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. He also kept in touch with Tom, who checked in periodically to see how things were going. During one phone call, Tom asked, "How does it feel to be running such a big operation?" Jack paused, thinking carefully before answering. "It feels challenging, but good. I'm learning a lot, and I think I'm making a difference. Thanks again for believing in me." Tom chuckled. "I knew you'd rise to the occasion. Just keep doing what you're doing." Perhaps the most rewarding part of Jack's new role was the opportunity to give back. Inspired by Tom's generosity, he launched a program offering free car repairs to veterans and low-income families once a month. On those designated Saturdays, the facility buzzed with energy as volunteers joined Jack and his team to service vehicles. Watching grateful customers drive away with smiles on their faces reminded Jack of why he'd become a mechanic in the first place: to help people. By the end of his first year, Jack had transformed not only the fleet department, but also himself. He was no longer the same man who had nervously accepted Tom's offer in the driveway of his old garage. He had grown more confident, more resilient, and more compassionate. Yet despite all the changes, he remained grounded in the values that had guided him throughout his life: hard work, integrity, and kindness. One evening, as he stood in the parking lot watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, Jack reflected on how far he'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Fixing Tom's truck had been the start of something bigger, a chain reaction of opportunities and connections that had changed his life forever. And as he climbed into his own modest car to head home, he couldn't help but smile. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he was ready. As Jack's second year in charge of the fleet department began, he found himself settling into a rhythm. The initial chaos of learning the ropes had given way to a steady routine, and he felt more confident in his role. Each morning he greeted his team with a smile, knowing they relied on him to lead them through the day's challenges. Though there were still moments of stress, like when a critical vehicle broke down or a supplier failed to deliver parts on time, Jack handled these situations with calm determination. He had learned that problems weren't roadblocks, they were puzzles waiting to be solved. One of the biggest changes during this time was how Jack viewed success. In the past, he'd measured it by the number of cars he repaired or the money he earned. Now he saw it differently. Success wasn't just about numbers, it was about impact. Every time a driver thanked him for keeping their vehicle running smoothly, or a veteran left the free repair day with tears of gratitude, Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment. These small victories reminded him that his work mattered, not just to the company but to real people whose lives depended on reliable transportation. Jack also noticed subtle shifts in his personal life. For years, he'd been so consumed with work that he rarely took time for himself. But now he made an effort to slow down and enjoy the little things. On weekends, he often went fishing at a nearby lake, something he hadn't done since he was a kid. The quiet solitude gave him space to think and recharge. Sometimes he invited Sarah along, and they spent hours chatting while casting lines into the water. "You seem happier," she remarked one sunny afternoon. "Like you're finally living instead of just surviving." Jack nodded, realizing she was right. For so long, he'd been stuck in survival mode, scraping by paycheck to paycheck and wondering if things would ever get better. Now he had stability, not just financially but emotionally. He no longer worried about losing everything if one repair went wrong or a customer couldn't pay. That freedom allowed him to dream bigger, to imagine a future where he could do even more good. One day, as Jack reviewed reports in his office, Linda knocked on the doorframe. "Got a minute?" she asked. When Jack gestured for her to come in, she handed him a folder. "We've been talking upstairs, and we think it's time to expand your responsibilities." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Expand how?" Linda explained that the company wanted to open a new branch in a neighboring city. It would require setting up another fleet maintenance facility from scratch, and they believed Jack was the perfect person to oversee the project. "It's a big step," she said, "but we trust you can handle it. You've proven yourself here." For a moment, Jack felt the familiar pang of doubt creep in. Was he ready for another challenge? Could he manage 2 locations at once? But then he remembered Tom's words. If you bring that same heart to this job, there's no limit to what you can achieve. Taking a deep breath, Jack smiled. I'll do it, he said firmly. But I might need some help figuring out the details. The next few months were a blur of planning and preparation. Jack worked closely with architects, engineers, and suppliers to design the new facility. He visited potential sites, interviewed candidates for leadership roles, and outlined processes to ensure smooth operations. At times, the workload felt overwhelming, but he reminded himself why he was doing it. This wasn't just about expanding the business, it was about creating opportunities for others. The new branch would employ dozens of mechanics, drivers, and support staff, giving them stable jobs and a chance to grow. When the grand opening finally arrived, Jack stood proudly outside the gleaming building, watching as employees filed in for their first day. A ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd of local officials, company executives, and curious residents. As Jack addressed the gathering, his voice filled with pride. "This place is more than just a garage," he said. "It's a place where people will build careers, support families, and make a difference in our community. I'm honored to be part of it." The applause that followed was deafening, and Jack couldn't help but feel a swell of emotion. Looking out at the faces of his team, he realized how far he'd come from the days of working alone in his tiny garage. Back then, he'd never imagined leading not 1 but 2 facilities, let alone inspiring others to follow his example. Yet, here he was, standing proof that kindness, hard work, and perseverance could open doors you never knew existed. With the new branch up and running, Jack divided his time between the 2 locations. Traveling between cities kept him busy, but he didn't mind. He enjoyed meeting new people, solving fresh challenges, and seeing firsthand how his efforts impacted communities. Drivers at both facilities praised the efficiency and care of the services, and clients raved about the reliability of the fleet. Word spread quickly, and soon, other branches within the company began adopting Jack's methods. Despite his growing responsibilities, Jack never lost sight of what mattered most: helping those in need. The free repair program continued to thrive, drawing volunteers from across the region. One memorable Saturday, a young single mother brought in her car, which had been leaking oil for weeks. She explained that she couldn't afford repairs and feared losing her job if she missed another shift. By the end of the day, Jack and his team had fixed the issue, refusing to accept any payment. As she drove away, waving tearfully through the window, Jack felt a lump in his throat. Moments like these reminded him why he'd chosen this path. Back home, Jack's reputation grew beyond the company. Local newspapers wrote articles about his journey from struggling mechanic to successful manager. Neighbors who once barely noticed him now stopped to chat, congratulating him on his achievements. Some even offered to invest in his ideas, encouraging him to start his own business someday. While Jack appreciated the compliments, he wasn't interested in leaving the company that had given him so much. Instead, he focused on mentoring younger mechanics, sharing the lessons he'd learned along the way. "You don't have to be perfect to succeed," he told a group of trainees one afternoon. "You just have to care about what you do and the people you serve. That's what makes the difference." By the end of his 3rd year, Jack had become a cornerstone of the company. His name was synonymous with excellence, integrity, and compassion. Yet despite all the accolades, he remained humble. He still lived in the same modest apartment above his old garage, though he rarely used it anymore. On quiet evenings, he sometimes sat on the steps, gazing at the stars and reflecting on his journey. From fixing broken-down trucks to managing fleets and building new facilities, he'd traveled a long road, but one he wouldn't trade for anything. One evening, as Jack prepared to leave the original facility after a long day, he noticed a familiar figure leaning against a limousine, parked outside. It was Tom. Smiling, Jack walked over and shook his hand. "What brings you here?" he asked. Tom grinned. "Just wanted to see how my investment turned out," he said. gesturing toward the bustling garage. Looks like it paid off. Jack laughed, feeling a surge of gratitude. It's because of you I'm here, he said sincerely. I owe you everything. Tom shook his head. No, Jack, you did this. All I did was give you a chance. The rest was all you. As they stood there talking under the fading light, Jack realized something profound. Life was full of unexpected turns, moments that seemed ordinary at first but carried the seeds of transformation. Fixing Tom's truck had been one of those moments, a simple act of kindness that had set off a chain reaction, changing not only his life, but the lives of countless others. And as Jack climbed into his car to head home, he knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come. Jack's 4th year in charge of the fleet department marked a turning point, not just for him but for everyone around him. The 2 facilities he managed were running like well-oiled machines, pun intended. Drivers praised the reliability of their vehicles, clients raved about the service, and employees felt valued and motivated. Jack had created something special, an environment where hard work was rewarded, kindness was prioritized, and no one was left behind. But as much as he loved what he'd built, he couldn't help feeling that there was still more to do. One crisp autumn morning, as Jack reviewed quarterly reports in his office, Linda knocked on the doorframe again. By now, her visits usually meant big news. "Got a minute?" she asked with a sly smile. When Jack nodded, she stepped inside and handed him another folder. Inside was a proposal for a 3rd facility in a larger city several hours away. This time, however, the plan wasn't just to replicate what they'd done before. The company wanted to use this branch as a training center, a place where aspiring mechanics could learn the trade under Jack's guidance. "They want you to oversee it," Linda said, her tone casual but her eyes gleaming with excitement. "You'd be shaping the next generation of mechanics." For a moment, Jack sat silently, processing the idea. Training others wasn't entirely new to him. He'd been mentoring young mechanics at both locations for years. But this was different. This was formalizing his role as a teacher, someone who could pass on not only skills but values. It was a huge responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity. After a long pause, he looked up at Linda and smiled. "Let's do it," he said simply. The months leading up to the launch of the training center were some of the busiest of Jack's life. He worked tirelessly to design the curriculum, ensuring it covered everything from basic repairs to advanced diagnostics. He collaborated with industry experts to include modules on emerging technologies like electric vehicles and hybrid engines. He even reached out to local schools and community centers to spread the word, hoping to attract students from diverse backgrounds. When the training center finally opened its doors, Jack stood at the front of a classroom filled with eager faces. Some were teenagers fresh out of high school, while others were adults looking for a career change. As he introduced himself and explained the program, Jack felt a wave of pride. These people weren't just students. They were future mechanics, potential leaders, and maybe even dreamers like he had once been. Over the following weeks, Jack spent countless hours teaching, demonstrating, and guiding his students. He emphasized not just technical skills, but also soft skills like communication, teamwork, and problem-solving. Being a good mechanic isn't just about fixing cars, he told them during one session. It's about understanding people, their needs, their worries, their hopes. That's how you make a real difference. The students responded enthusiastically, soaking up every lesson. Many stayed late to practice, asking questions and seeking advice. Some struggled initially, frustrated by the complexity of certain tasks, but Jack encouraged them to keep trying. Mistakes are part of learning, he reminded them. Don't be afraid to fail. It's how you grow. As the first cohort completed the program, Jack organized a graduation ceremony. Families packed into the facility, cheering loudly as each student received a certificate. One graduate, a young woman named Maria, gave a heartfelt speech thanking Jack for believing in her when she doubted herself. "Before this program, I didn't think I could do anything like this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But Mr. Jack showed me that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined." Watching Maria speak, Jack felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Moments like these made all the long hours and sleepless nights worth it. He wasn't just building careers. He was changing lives. Meanwhile, the free repair program continued to thrive, expanding to include the new locations. Volunteers poured in from across the region, eager to lend a hand. On repair days, the facilities buzzed with activity as veterans. Low-income families and struggling single parents brought in their cars. Each vehicle repaired was a story of hope restored. A mother able to drive her kids to school, a veteran able to commute to work, a family able to take a road trip without worry. Word of Jack's initiatives spread far beyond the company. Logan. Newspapers wrote glowing articles calling him a community hero. Non-profits approached him about partnerships, hoping to replicate his model in other cities. Even national media picked up the story, featuring Jack in interviews and documentaries. Through it all, he remained humble, deflecting praise onto his team and the communities that supported him. "You're making such a difference," Sarah told him one evening over coffee. They were sitting in her diner, the same spot where they'd shared so many conversations over the years. "Do you ever stop and think about how much your life has changed?" Jack chuckled, stirring sugar into his cup. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But honestly, it doesn't feel like my life has changed. It feels like I've finally found my purpose. Everything I went through, the struggles, the doubts, the hard work, it all led me here. And I wouldn't trade it for anything." Sarah smiled, shaking her head. "You're something else, Jack. Always have been." As the years passed, Jack's influence continued to grow. The training center became a hub of innovation, producing skilled mechanics who went on to work in garages, dealerships, and even start their own businesses. Alumni often returned to thank Jack or share updates about their successes. One former student opened a mobile repair service for rural areas, inspired by Jack's commitment to helping those in need. Another founded a non-profit offering free car maintenance workshops for women. Despite his growing fame, Jack stayed grounded. He still visited his old garage occasionally, sitting on the steps and remembering where it all began. Sometimes, he drove past Tom's house, though he hadn't seen him in a while. Their paths had diverged since that fateful day, but Jack never forgot the man who had believed in him when he needed it most. One evening, as Jack prepared to leave the original facility after a long day, he noticed a familiar figure leaning against a limousine parked outside. It was Tom. Smiling, Jack walked over and shook his hand. "What brings you here?" he asked. Tom grinned. "Just checking in," he said. "Looks like things are going well." "You could say that," Jack replied, gesturing toward the bustling garage. "All thanks to you." Tom shook his head. "No, Jack. You did this. All I did was give you a chance. The rest was all you." As they stood there talking under the fading light, Jack realized something profound. Life was full of unexpected turns, moments that seemed ordinary at first, but carried the seeds of transformation. Fixing Tom's truck had been one of those moments. A simple act of kindness that had set off a chain reaction, changing not only his life but the lives of countless others. By the time Jack retired, decades later, he had built a legacy that extended far beyond the walls of any garage. His name was etched into the fabric of the community, synonymous with generosity, resilience, and hope. Yet despite all the accolades and achievements, he remained the same humble mechanic at heart, the kind of person who saw value in every broken-down car and every struggling soul. As he sat on the porch of his modest home watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, Jack reflected on his journey. From the dingy garage where he'd once worked alone to the sprawling facilities and training centers that bore his mark, he had come a long way. But none of it would have mattered if he hadn't stayed true to himself, kind, honest, and determined to make a difference. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jack smiled. He didn't need titles or trophies to know he'd lived a meaningful life. All he needed was the knowledge that he'd helped others find their way, just as someone had once helped him.